Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I wanted to take the opportunity to talk to you about all the books that I read in May. I actually read a ton in May. I have the highest book count of any month so far this year, and I didn't even read any books with my daughter for school. So like this is just books that I read by myself, and I still read like 5 pages less than what I read in April, but I think it's just because I read bigger books in April than I did in May. But I essentially kind of like didn't do much of a TBR. I just allowed myself to mood read quite a bit, especially when I went to California to visit Christy earlier this month. And in that vlog, I talk much more in depth about a couple of the books that are here. So I'll link that if you want to see the beautiful footage and see the beautiful Christy and hear my more in-depth thoughts on the books that I read there. Mood reading and reading whatever I felt like meant I wanted to be reading more, and I spent more of my free time reading. I didn't even pick up like a single video game during the month of May. I just spent like literally all my free time reading, and it was glorious. So I am going to be dividing this video up into sections according to genres. So that way you can kind of skip around. If there's something you're really not interested in, you could just skip over that, and something that you love, you know, whatever. Okay, so we're going to start off with science fiction and fantasy. One of the books I finished earlier in the month while I was in California was The Air Affair by Jasper Fforde. This is the first in the Thursday Next series. This is such a fun ride. Like, my gosh, it's so weird and quirky and chaotic, and it has a lot of absurdism, so just know that going in. But this is essentially kind of like an alternate history where the world looks quite different than it looks now. And our main character, Thursday Next, works for this kind of like literary core that is enforcing some like literary laws. So like, for example, one of the main plot beats is that the original manuscript of Martin Chuzzlewit goes missing, and so they want to go and investigate that, because if you somehow make changes to the original manuscript, you then change every single copy that exists. But they also examine like forgeries, trying to determine what's real. There's a whole debate on if Shakespeare actually wrote his own plays, and a lot of people think that Francis Bacon did instead in this world. And obviously Jane Eyre plays a pretty big role. You might be able to tell that from the title. And in this world, the ending of Jane Eyre is completely different than the actual book. So it's super interesting. It's super fun. You do have to read Jane Eyre before you read this, because it does spoil the ending completely. I mean, if you don't care about the ending being spoiled, you could still read it, but I think you'll appreciate it more if you have previously read Jane Eyre. But it's just so fun. I continued in reading the Live Ship Trader series by Robin Hobb this month, and I read Mad Ship with my friend Whitney, and my gosh, what a ride this was. I wanted to do nothing but read this book, and I had other books that I was supposed to be reading, but all I wanted to do was read this book. It was fabulous. This series just keeps getting better and better and better. I can't tell you very much about this specific book because that would be quite spoilery, since it is the second book in a trilogy. But if you don't know anything about this series, it's within Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings series. So it happens after the Farseer trilogy, which is the original trilogy, but this is set in a completely different area. It's very piratey. There are these ships that are able to gain sentience. And yeah, it's just really, really fascinating. It is quite a bit grittier than a lot of other books that I read and recommend on my channel. So you're definitely going to want to check like trigger warnings and stuff, because yeah, it gets kind of intense at times. And the last fantasy book that I finished in the month of May, I actually finished on the last day of May. Actually, I finished Mad Ship on the last day of May too. I was like down to the wire with like 3 of my books, and I'm like, I think I can finish these, and I did finish them all. But anyways, that is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I've wanted to read this for a while because it's billed as a cozy fantasy, and it is a trilogy. I'm pretty sure the last book just came out, so I think it's only supposed to be 3 books. I don't think it's going to be more than 3, but I'm not totally sure on that. But I do know that book 3 just came out this year. So this is the story of a woman in the early 1900s who is a professor. Well, I can't remember if it's Oxford or Cambridge, but she's a professor, and she goes around and she's studying fairies, essentially. But they're more fae than like, they're not like the Tinkerbell kind of cutesy fairies. They're like fae. Some of them are kind of like more common and they're kind of benign, but there are some more kind of like malevolent fae. So this book does have a little bit of like edginess to it at times with kind of like higher stakes of kind of some more dangerous fairies. It's written in journal format as Emily Wilde is going on an expedition to examine some fairies in an area that no one knows anything about. And so she's writing in her journal about an encyclopedia that she is writing and compiling about all kinds of different fairies. So it was really, really fun. I've seen a lot of people compare this to the Memoirs of Lady Trent series, which I read last year. And I see the similarities because it's definitely got some of the same cozy vibes. But the thing about Emily Wilde is it does have magic, and Lady Trent is about dragons, but the dragons don't have any magical abilities. They're just creatures in this world. And so I feel like Lady Trent has more political underpinnings of its world, and this has more magical elements. So it was super fun. I really liked it. Next, we're going to talk about some classics. I read 4 classics this month. Some of them were really short, like The Pearl by John Steinbeck. I really enjoyed this. I haven't read it before, even though it's super short. A lot of kids read it in high school. I was not one of those kids, but I am preparing to potentially teach an American literature class to the high schoolers at my homeschool group this fall. And so I was reading this to kind of gauge, would I rather teach The Pearl or would I rather teach Of Mice and Men? And I feel like The Pearl is like great for discussion and a great introduction to Steinbeck's writing for high schoolers. So I really enjoyed it. It's about a man who lives in this like impoverished community, and he finds this like pearl of the world, which is huge and promises great wealth to him. And it's kind of about how wealth can change a person, but also change a community. And so it's interesting and would foster really great discussion. I also read another Willa Cather this month. It is the third Willa Cather I have read this year, and it is A Lost Lady. I read this with Dia and Stephanie and Penny, and it was fine. It's about this woman who's a wealthy woman who like lives in the city in the winter, but she comes every summer to like her summer home with her husband. And it's really written from the perspective of a boy who's growing up in this town, who like greatly admires her. She's very like beautiful. She's very like charismatic. People are drawn to her. And so there are elements to the story that I thought were well done. I thought like the nature writing was really beautiful. And I had read beforehand that this is supposed to be kind of a metaphorical story of kind of the way that things were, and then the dying off of some of the way things were in the West and the rise of capitalism, essentially. So the story is intentionally allegorical in that way. And in that way, I think that it gets its message across fairly well, but I didn't think that it was a super interesting story, unfortunately. I kind of was not invested in what really happened to any of the characters. I still thought the writing was beautiful, but it felt pretty flat for me. And unfortunately, that is true of every single Willa Cather I have read this year. And I was really hoping for another favorite because the past 2 years I've had a Willa Cather in my top 10. And this year, all 3 Willa Cathers I've read have been like 3-star-ish. So it's kind of unfortunate. I also read 8 Cousins by Louise May Alcott. This was something that I did a Patreon vlog for. So every month I read a book that someone in my Patreon has recommended to me, and then I vlog my experience. And so this was this month's, which I intentionally chose for May because I know that this is one of Dia's favorites. May is her birthday month, and so I really wanted to choose this for that month. And also seasonally, this was perfect. Like this takes place over the course of a year, but a huge chunk of the book does happen in the summertime, and so it feels very seasonal. This is a story of a young orphan girl who has been recently orphaned, and she goes to live with her aunts and cousins, and there are 7 cousins and they're all boys, and she's a little flabbergasted by them because she has only attended like all girl boarding schools, and so it's kind of a little bit of culture shock. Her uncle ends up becoming her legal guardian, and so he comes and is trying to take care of her. She's kind of sickly, and his remedy for her is for her to run and play and jump with her boy cousins and all that kind of stuff. And so it was a really sweet story. It was really fun to read about the family relationships that develop, Some of the hijinks that the cousins get into were really funny. But it is a children's book. And so as such, I really wished that I had read this when I was a child, because I think that this would have been a favorite of my childhood. But as an adult, it just didn't have the same oomph for me. So I kind of feel like I was robbed not reading this as a child. And the last classic that I'm going to talk about is the third book that I finished on the very last day of the month. And that's Anne of the Island by Ellen Montgomery. I've been reading through this series with Stephanie, and we kind of accidentally took a pause. We read, Anne of Green Gables in January and Anne of Avonlea in February, and then here we are in May reading Anne of the Island. So it kind of took us a while to get back to it, but this was just so delightful. As you can tell from all my tabs, it was just such a joy to read this, and the ending of this is just so perfect. If you know, you know, but Ellen Montgomery is just one of my favorite authors, and I just love her so much. Okay, moving on to some nonfiction. I read 2 nonfiction this month, one of which I started in February and read half of it and then just overscheduled myself, so I had to put a pause on it. But that is Patriot by Alexei Navalny, and I did finish this in California, which was perfect because this was one of Christy's favorite books last year. So I was able to talk to her while I was reading the second half of it, and this book is incredible. I would recommend it to everyone. It is written by a lawyer who is living in Russia, and his experiences, growing up in the Soviet Union, but then after the Soviet Union is dismantled, his experiences of trying to overcome a lot of the lack of freedoms that the Russian people have. And he got in a lot of trouble with a lot of politicians, including Putin, and was imprisoned. So the second half of this book is his journals when he was in prison, and he was killed by Putin. So this was published posthumously, and there is a lot of heaviness and a lot of sadness in this book, obviously, but he has such a great sense of humor. So he really balances fact with emotion and then also with humor. So even though it is heavy, there were moments of levity, and it was so informative, but also just so well written and just absolutely incredible. The other nonfiction I read this month was also a memoir, and that is The House of My Mother by Sherry Frankie. And probably a lot of you have heard of Ruby Frankie, and that was like in the news. All of the stuff that blew up about that. She was a mommy vlogger in Utah and was really, really popular with a YouTube channel called 8 Passengers. And it was revealed over time the abuse that was happening behind the scenes, and that really escalated when she partnered with this woman who was part of like a therapy company, and that's when things escalated even farther. But there was actually evidence of abuse that was happening like on screen in videos and vlogs, and yet somehow nothing really happened, and people, meaning like CPS and the police and stuff, never really intervened. So this is her oldest daughter, who at the time of Ruby Frankie's arrest and trial and imprisonment was already out of the house, was already like no contact essentially with her mother. And so this is her memoir of her time growing up in a house where everything was completely publicized. Everyone saw every embarrassing thing that happened to her in middle school and high school, and just kind of trying to reconcile the guilt, the manipulation, the gaslighting, the abuse, like all of these kinds of things. And it was a fascinating book, and I'm really glad that I listened to it, but it was written so close on the heels of the abuse, so close on the heels of the trial and everything else, that there was moments that felt oddly detached for me. And I feel like it's because, Sherry's so young and went through so much, and there's so much that she just hadn't processed yet, I feel like, fully, for her to be writing a memoir about some of these things. That's my personal opinion. Other people might feel differently. I did see some reviews where people said they felt like their writing was too simplistic and that she needed a better editor. I didn't feel that way, but again, I listened to it on audio, and I tend to be a lot less critical of some of the things that are happening in terms of writing style on audio, because it was actually read by Sherry Frankie. And so I think that that really worked well for the audiobook. Next, we're going to talk about some translated literature, and I'm actually going to include a manga volume that I read in here as well because it is translated from Japanese and I only read one manga, so it feels silly to just put it in its own category if I don't have to. So I read Attack on Titan volume 16, and I feel like I'm back in the groove with liking Attack on Titan again, because the last two volumes before this, I was just like, oh, they're okay. They really felt like filler, and like we weren't really getting any information. There was just kind of some political strife. There were no Titans at all, and so I kind of was just getting a little bit antsy. I don't want to say bored, because I wasn't bored while I was reading them, but I was just kind of like, okay, well, when are we going to get to some reveals? When are we going to get back to the story? When are we going to get back to Titans? And this volume totally delivered on all of those things, and I really enjoyed it. Then I read two more translated books, and both of them were translated from Japanese. One of them I read in California, and that is The Curious Kitten of the Chibaneko Kitchen. So the premise of this book is that essentially when people die, it is a common Buddhist tradition to offer remembrance meals for them. And so there is this restaurant that offers remembrance meals. But I guess normally these remembrance meals are mostly the same, but these ones are specific to the person who has passed. And there is an opportunity for this person who has passed to come and appear to their loved one, but they'll leave by the time the steam is done rising off of the food, and it's their last opportunity to interact with the living world. So in the cases of each of these stories, they're pretty episodic, as is typical with cozy Japanese literature, that there are people who come in and they've lost a loved one and they're grieving, and then they have an opportunity to interact with them one more time. And I just really like how Japanese cozy literature deals with death, because it does it in an emotional way where you're still really invested. And I definitely cried at the end of this book because I was very emotionally invested, but at the same time, it still feels soothing and comforting. It feels like a hug in the book. So I really, really loved this book. I think I maybe loved even more the second one, which I read, which is The Lantern of Lost Memories. This one is such a cool premise. Again, also deals with death, but you know that phrase that like when people have a near-death experience and they say their whole life flashed before their eyes? That's kind of what this book is about. So essentially when someone dies before they pass on to like the other side, they're kind of in this waiting area, and it's like a studio where they are then presented with all these photos, and they have to choose one photo for every year of their life. And then this like lantern comes down and plays all of these photos, and then they pass on. And so for each person that comes in, there's a different memory that they want to focus on. And if there's a memory that they've revisited a bunch of times, the photo is blurry or damaged in some way. And so then they're able to travel back to that one day in time and retake the photo. It is such a unique premise and really, really beautiful. And like I said, most cozy Japanese literature that I've read is quite episodic, and the stories don't necessarily intersect that much. They might have the same setting or something, but they don't really go together as much. This book actually comes full circle, and all the stories end up intersecting at the end in a very, very meaningful way, which was another thing that I felt was pretty unique about this story. So I just loved it. I thought it was absolutely perfect, like amazing. But I will warn you that the last story in this deals pretty heavily with child abuse in a way that was really sad and kind of horrifying. It wasn't like explicitly terrible, but it's just very heavy. So just know that going in if that's something that bothers you. I have three more books that I want to talk about, but they're each in their own genre. So, oh well. The first one is like mystery slash suspense, maybe. And that's Thornyhold by Mary Stewart. This is my third Mary Stewart. I just read Rose Cottage in April, and then last summer I read Nine Coaches Waiting. So this is a story of a woman, and we get her childhood, but the bulk of the story and the plot actually has to do with her adult life. So she has this cousin, it's her mother's cousin, who it kind of has this like witchy reputation. She's an herbalist and stuff, but seems to like know some certain things about the future. And she passes away, and she leaves her house, Thornyhold, to this young woman. And so she goes and lives there, and there's some kind of like very slow, very kind of like unsettling things that are happening there. And so, yeah, that's kind of all I'm going to tell you, because it's a really short book. It's only like 200 pages long. As always, Mary Stewart is the queen of setting. It is what she does best, where you just feel totally immersed in wherever you are. And every single book of hers I've read has a vastly different setting. And so that is just so cool. I'm amazed at how she can have these vivid settings and totally different locations, and yet each of them feels like so immersive and so well done. It is absolutely what she does the best. I was a little underwhelmed by this particular Mary Stewart. I still enjoyed it, but there are some elements to it that I just kind of didn't enjoy as much. I wasn't invested as much in the story resolution. And the story took a turn that I didn't think it was going to take, that I didn't really enjoy. I can't tell you more about that without spoiling it. I'm still glad that I read it, but it just wasn't a favorite, unfortunately. But I still love Mary Stewart and can't wait to read more of her books. I also read a Christian fiction this month. I know. Who am I? I never do that. I kind of have a very complicated relationship with modern Christian fiction, and that I often feel like the writing quality isn't there. And then I also feel like some of the stuff is either like so heavy handed or it's just not even there at all. And I'm constantly like hoping for a balance. And there were so many things that I really did enjoy about this book. I really liked the protagonist, Mrs. Kipp, because she reminds me of my mom in a lot of ways, in her personality and how she's always looking for every opportunity to share Jesus with literally every single person that she encounters. So Mrs. Kipp is living in a nursing home that is especially for like terminal illnesses and end of life care. So this is not just an assisted living facility. These are people who are going to die probably relatively soon. And this young newspaper reporter is assigned by her boss to go write an obituary on Mrs. Kipp. But it's kind of a ruse because Mrs. Kipp has done some amazing things that have really impacted the town in which they live. But the reporter doesn't know that. She's supposed to uncover this slowly. So that's kind of the premise of the story. I found myself not really enjoying the reporter or really ever investing in her character. I didn't like her that much. And I think that that definitely impacted my overall enjoyment of this book. But I do think that there was a lot of really wonderful nuggets of truth sprinkled throughout that I did really enjoy. And I thought that the prose was really nice. Again, I feel like a lot of Christian fiction have like pretty utilitarian prose, and I don't enjoy utilitarian prose. I really want more lovely writing most of the time. And if it's not really lovely writing, it has to be like a fascinating plot for me to still like really enjoy it. So this kind of had a nice mix of that. Most people that I know love this book so much, give it 5 stars, are sobbing at the end. I didn't feel that way. It was probably like 3.5 star for me. So I enjoyed elements of it, but it didn't leave a long lasting mark on me. But I'm definitely in the minority with that. So if the premise sounds interesting to you and you like Christian fiction, this book might just change your life, because it does for a lot of people who read it. And the last book that I want to talk about is, I guess, how would you categorize this? It's literary fiction, but it's also historical fiction. And that's Purple Hibiscus. This is Adichie's debut novel, which I did not know. I read this for my in-person book club. And it was written in the early 2000s, but it is set in 1980s Nigeria. So there is a historical component there with kind of some political uprisings that are happening. And while some of that does impact the plot, that's not really the point of the story. It's just kind of part of the setting. So this is a story of a teenage girl and her brother who have been raised in a very religious household that has a lot of abuse. And it's very difficult to read at times. Most of the abuse takes place off the page, whether it's something that the main character overhears or remembers, but there are a few instances of graphic abuse that does take place on the page. And the oppressiveness of the house and the situation is very vivid, as is the setting of Nigeria. But the book is not without hope or without growth or without nuance. There's some really interesting conversations to be had in this book in terms of love coexisting with abuse and things not being bad all the time. And that is true, I think, in most abusive situations. But I felt like it was so well done. and I really, really loved it. I thought that the writing was beautiful and immersive and deep, and I can't believe it was a debut novel. Like, I have to read more of this author's work because it was so good. Anyway, those are all the books that I read in the month of May. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. I would love to know your thoughts on any of the books that I read here, but also I would love to hear what you've been reading. What's your favorite book that you read in the month of May? I would love to know. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.